Well, hello and welcome to another episode of the Edufuturists podcast. We are getting towards the end of 2025. I know I don't normally tell you what time of year that we're recording this, but we're at that point, and we're very excited to be have a special guest in the studio today who's going to be talking about a lot of the work that he has been doing. It's a story of as being a philanthropist, but then also what that impact is happening into education. So we're super excited about that. It is Edufuturist stuff is happening, Steve. Hope, isn't it? Things are moving in a direction, but we're lots and lots of updates to give you as listeners on the roadshow that is now well underway. The book, the awards, all the other bits that are cool that are happening, and we're excited about that. So, but we have got a guest in the studio. So as we've said a few times now, I speak to Steve Hope quite a lot. I'm not interested in anything else he has to say. So I actually am interested in the guest that's in the studio with us today. And we are joined by Steve Rigby. Steve, would you, for those people who don't know you as our audience, would you just give us a little bit of introduction to you and your background before we get into the bones of what we're going to talk about on the podcast today?
Sure thing, Ben. Yeah, so Steve Rigby, I'm Chief Executive of a business called the Rigby Group. Got a diverse business in principally technology, but operating across Western Europe, about 8,000 people, about 4 billion in revenue. It's 50 years old this year, so quite a proud moment, and actually one of the older technology businesses anywhere in the world. Microsoft is also 50 this year in context. So we have been very fortunate to rise to the top of our game as a top 10 UK family business. And that allows us to do lots of things philanthropically with some of the proceeds from the business. And we focus quite heavily in the education sector. I was born in Birmingham and the business started in Birmingham. So our primary focus sits around Birmingham and the secondary school system. But I also try and work nationally on some of the important policy work.
And I know we met recently, and we were chatting about some of the things that you're involved with. And I said it'd be lovely to have a conversation on the Edufuturists podcast about what you're doing and the work that's particularly around social mobility and social justice, that I know that is close to your heart and to the business's heart, of making a difference in and around where you are. And so thank you for joining us into that space. Yeah, maybe if it's possible, before we kind of get into that social justice piece, as the foundation, the Rigby Foundation and the Rigby Group as an organisation, you said you're in the technology space. What does that look like? And for 50 years being in that space, celebrating a milestone alongside Microsoft, that is pretty impressive. And I know that that's a proud moment, like you said, for you and your family. What do you think brought you into that space and kept you there for 50 years, maybe?
Well, you're fortunate in technology. You've both got change, which drives opportunity, and you've got risk. And that risk comes from not changing sufficiently with the times. And we're in this very interesting time today with the advent of artificial intelligence, which is going to transform many, many sectors of society. And for many people, it will offer opportunity. And for others, unfortunately, it will offer less opportunity. And in fact, could have quite substantial societal impact. So our business is very broad. It's everything from a desktop to a data center. As I say, in multiple jurisdictions, just because it's got to such a scale of an IT services business, both supplying the technology and integrating that technology into typically large governments and large corporates. The organization is very broad. We're also one of the largest venture capital investors here in the UK and overseas in the US. And we also run later stage private equity style transactions with three major investments operating in this country or overseas. So we get a really good landscape of what's happening. We get to see some of the fun technology out there. We get to understand where that opportunity might send us. And that's a privileged position to be in. And not everyone's in that privileged position, which is why whenever we try and make money, we also try and put back. And I have no doubt in the world of AI that we're on a journey to make money and be one of the net beneficiaries. But I do worry that not everyone in society will be, which is why some of our philanthropic activity is focused on putting back into some of the societal change coming from the disruption that AI will bring us.
Yeah, and it's really interesting, actually. It's great that obviously you're British it's always is a positive start. But there is so much press in terms of the individuals and organisations that are making vast amounts of money for the benefit of a few. And you've talked about that openly. Ultimately, that you will profit from technology and the advance in AI. But actually, that conversation is really important. That it isn't just everybody taking money out and the poorer getting poorer. The foundation and its work with education is really, really key because it demonstrates that ultimately those can go hand in hand. It doesn't have to be you make money and you would just ignore everybody else. So maybe if you could kind of start there in regards to, I know Ben talked about social justice and all of those, but what are the founding principles and the areas of focus? Does that change year on year? Or actually, and as that evolved, as your business has evolved, or because you can do more, or actually has it always been with the principles in regards to the foundation and the core message and the core offering that you do with in terms of your work with education and support?
Yeah, so we've sort of relaunched ourselves, Steve. We're 32 years old as a foundation, but relaunched a couple of years ago. We were what was called a grant maker, so an organisation that presented grants to other organisations, either at their request or through our instigation. And that served us very well. We've done some amazing things around our region and nationally. Things such as a cancer facility in Stratford-upon-Avon, where we have a head office facility for our topco. Through to supporting things like the CVSO, which is the symphony orchestra in Birmingham. We really do a lot of things that span our region, and then also national activity, everything from Prince's Trust to many other organisations. But as we've refocused in the last couple of years, I've taken a startup mentality to what we're doing as we look to refresh our foundation. And rather than focus on a broader set of charities, we've decided to focus on a small number of education-based charities on the basis that education for many people, is a privilege. For other people, it's not necessarily even seen as a right that they should have a good education by their parents. So our job in life is to try and help those that are less advantaged than ourselves. And in the West Midlands, specifically in Birmingham, we've got very, very high levels of deprivation. That deprivation and poverty leads to ignorance, leads to poor educational outcomes, leads to a lack of father figures for all intents and purposes, lack of aspiration, lack of attainment. And our job is to try and help, not in every circumstance, because we don't have that level of ability to give money away, but in the chosen areas that we're working in, to try and provide schools with a chance for that child. So secondary focused as an environment, and typically the interventions, it's a slightly a word I don't particularly love, but it is the best word for it. But typically the interventions that we're funding, such as maths or English tuition, such as one-to-one mental health support, such as bursaries going to higher education, they will be £1,000 plus interventions. So we're trying to focus on a smaller number of pupils. This year we're helping about 1,370 people through that main scheme, across 10 school partners. We're trying to make sure that the intervention that we offer is going to make a difference to that person's life. And it shows that somebody believes in them and hopes for them.
And that's it's really interesting. We had a conversation recently on the podcast with Joe Lowther, who was talking about the idea about hope for a future and how if you can't see what might be possible and the opportunities that are possible, it's very difficult to have any motivation and joy or happiness or aspiration in the present, right? So the fact that somebody is saying there is something that we believe in you and we'll do something, and it might not be easy for you to understand that yourself and why it's not come from your nearest and dearest, but there's somebody in there that's trying to give you an experience and broaden your horizons, and that help support that move into the hope. I think that is many of us probably underestimate the need for that, and the stats that we were looking at in preparation for this that your the foundation have shared, and the work that you do now, Inspiring Futures, about how many the youth unemployment in Birmingham, and then the conversations around how many young people are eligible for free school meals and pupil premium in the city and the surrounding areas is huge, right? And we have we might be as educationalists, and many of our listeners will be in the educational. They're either teachers at the chalk face or they're leaders in that space, or trying really hard to get across some curriculum or something similar. And if a child hasn't eaten that day, or if a child is dealing with ACEs and all the other elements that go with that, and the battling mental, you can teach them. You can be the best maths teacher in the world, but if you've not met and helped meet their felt needs, we're kind of missing the point, really, aren't we? We're not going to get very far into that space. And you've got a whole host of partners that are kind of committed to that justice piece, and I think that as a passion is something that we've talked about on a podcast a lot before, because it's almost like we assume that in education, that children, when they walk into school, they've walked into school, the job there of the teacher is to teach them, and then the school has become more wraparound, have to do more wraparound care. Is that kind of what the foundation's seen, and why you've gone into this further? Is that
Yeah, I
that
mean,
fair?
so our main program, as you mentioned, is called Inspiring Futures. So 10 schools, 10 charities, £100,000 a school. £100,000, as we know, in a secondary school, it's about a £6 to £7 million organisation typically. So, it's only an extra couple of percent of headroom, but we all know the difference that pupil premium makes, and that little bit of headroom allows them to do some of the different things. Yeah, but we're also, we're not just focused on that program. We have a number of other programs also running, trying to help schools. One is another way, and that's another £100,000 commitment in a school, which is trying to put in a parental liaison officer, what's called an ethos manager inside the school, trying to set a new framework of sort of ambition for the school, and put in a social worker into the environment, and a youth worker. And that combination of effort allows schools potentially to lift themselves again out of where they are. We're doing other things, working with the care system, actually putting young people who are either at risk of care or in the care system into the public school system, into private schools, so that they've really got a hope of breaking out of where they are, an aspiration. We're doing work with NEETs, funding 100 NEETs through a 6-month boot camp program. And often these pots of money that we're using are leveraging other forms of capital. So in that NEET environment, for every £2,000 I put in per person, £3,000 of government money is unlocked. So we're trying to think about things, as you do in the business. How can we convene and share issues? We've recently had a heads together event trying to take 30 teachers through, what developing skills for senior leadership looks like, where AI is going, to try and download them from the combined authority, where the employment base is looking like it's transitioning to. So we try and convene, we try and raise capital with other people to put into the system. And then importantly, we bring service providers into the market. So 3 of the 10 service providers that we have had never previously worked in the Birmingham school system. So we brought new charities into an environment to try and deal with needs. So as an example, DebateMate is an oracy charity focused on debating, but fundamentally it's about all the skills we know are super important, essential skills, communication, looking at people in the eye, articulating, being able to conduct yourself civilly in an environment where perhaps you're being challenged, skills that become really important. And in fact, I had a roundtable recently on AI with quite a large number of employers, people like Deloitte and PwC, Severn Trent, BT, a whole bunch of significant organizations. And now in the advent of AI, when people are submitting CVs, they themselves are using AI to review them. And that kind of human interaction piece is really changing. But what they're really looking for are the thing that actually the essential skills that we're losing in schools today, like play, like drama, like music, like communication skills, like being inquisitive, creative, the skills actually that might suit the world in the future, when we've all got, a huge computer with AI sat on our desk to do many things that previously you had to be very well trained to do. The world is going to shift, and many of those essential skills that we don't really have enough time for, nor do we get enough recognition from Ofsted from in the school system, will start to become really, really quite key.
Yeah, and it's really interesting actually. I were having this conversation the other day that the DFE and the guidance is that you don't have to use AI, But the challenge is that if you do, you you go onto the radar a little bit more, that they will challenge and they will review actually the skills, the tools, your frameworks, everything else. So there's actually a real need in terms of, if you do step into that space, which is so needed, actually a skills advancement and an understanding before you even consider just turning the tool on. I am going to take it back quite a step in terms of just that. I think you talked about in terms of social work and that parent liaison piece.
Mm.
I know there's been a lot, and we will step back into it, but I think that's really important. I think there's been a lot of conversations recently regards to attendance. How do you, and people saying that, how do you improve that? How do you improve the communication and the connectivity between a community and the school when a school is struggling? We've seen the drop in average attendance and all those kind of things. But actually, that engagement and that positive reinforcement around trying to underpin and have honest conversations around what is going on in the community and why children, some aren't attending, and are struggling in schools, is a real great way to invest, because ultimately it doesn't just say get your kids into school, which is the message often. It's a case of, right, how can we ensure some of these young people are supported and the parents have more of an understanding, or guardians, to the need of school. I don't want to give our free quick fire questions away, but we ask on a regular basis why children have to go to school. And ultimately, it's that message. Do you know, when if there is a family history of repeat offending, if that's what you want to call it, to attendance to school, how do you change that narrative about communication and liaison rather than direct and these letters that go home? So maybe if we spend a little bit more time there, if that's okay, Steve, in terms of what kind of work would they do around that and engagement of disengagement?
Well, I think there's generally a reason why children aren't attending. As we know, it's generally not something that's happening at school. It's something that's happening outside of school. We've recently this year actually funded Centre for Social Justice to do a really detailed study on attendance, focused on persistent absenteeism, which is 1.5 million of our young people are persistently absent from the school system, more than one day in 10. And that's the size of Leeds and Manchester and Liverpool combined, the centre of the cities. So it's a huge number of our children. It's about 18% of children not attending, and a further 3 or so on severe absenteeism, away for 50% of the time. So it's a major issue. It's blighting our future as a country. The numbers, as we know, got worse with COVID. They have been improving. But underlying that, what we really could do with in schools is more parent liaison. The trust has broken down between parents and schools. I'm in my early 50s. If I was on the street being sort of truant, as it were, then a stranger would stop me and say, "Why aren't you at school?" And today, it just seems as normal that children aren't at school. So society's broken down. Teachers were respected by parents. I think they are less so today, unfairly in my mind. They're often abused, as we know, verbally, in terms of the way in which they're taught to. So that whole parental teacher aspect has broken down, partly, societal changes. So, I think in an ideal world, we need to incentivize rather than just penalize. So we were advocating for, rather than fine straight away, for speed awareness style courses, which I'm sure we've all been on one of those. And, whilst it's very annoying to have to go, you do walk away with one or two things where you think, actually, I learned. And then if we could talk to our parents about the damage they're doing by a child missing a day a week in 10 days, and the life chances that child has, the possibility of offending, the possibility of getting a grade of 4 or above in maths and English, and then the follow-on employment potential and the loss of income, these ramifications, they're quite simple to articulate, but, it's difficult to do in a day-to-day environment. So, we'd all like parent monitors, or sorry, pupil monitors in schools. Not many schools can afford them. And it's ultimately, you've got to get under the skin of why a child isn't attending. Is it a problem with a child with anxiety, with general poor behaviour? Is it a problem at home? Is it a problem with a carer? Or there's generally underlying reasons why the child is doing that. But ultimately, we need to convince parents that children need to attend school on a full-time basis, because it's parents that will get somebody out of bed in the morning and dressed into school. Schools, if they're doing that job, are playing catch up afterwards. So the role of the parent in schools is a really important area. I'd love to say I've got lots of answers as to how we fix that, but there's not a lot of money flying around to try and help that. And at the end of the day, it's got to be the responsibility of the parents to get their children to school. Perhaps the school's job is to support those parents, but it can't be the other way around, which is how sometimes parents see it.
Yeah, and I think that's a really valid space in terms of I'm chair of governance at a primary school, just a small local primary school here, and there is there has been a definite shift in terms of the expectation of what parents want from schools and demand of schools and teachers and head teachers, and like they when they ring up they want to speak to the teacher, they forget that that teacher is actually teaching their children at that moment, and when they want so it's that whole level of it's not everybody, but that there is definitely a challenge into that space, and perhaps maybe this is, well, it's not maybe, it's part of the reason why we're writing the book that we're writing, is that the methodology of that, the system that we've had and perpetuated for as long as we have, that's dominated by uh, end linear assessments and exams heavy, and focused on knowledge retention and attendances about a physical building for 9 till 3 up for 180 days a year. Like those kind of models may well, part of the solution, like we said, when nobody really knows the solution, part of the solution might be to rethink some of those things and how that works, in terms of specifically engaging with those that are the furthest away. So as in those that, like those persistent attentive, like those that are right at the top end, 50% or more, um, poor attendance or low attendance. So I think that's it's exciting, it's interesting, but I think the fact that we are having these conversations, that people are having the conversations, and then we're valuing the young people and the justice that needs to be brought into that. And interestingly, it is that bit that seems to be forgotten, and part of the reason again why we're wanting to refocus from an Edufuturist perspective is that parents and guardians are often the forgotten people in the mix, because they've gone through school, so therefore they think that school should be like how it has always been, and we're all like, I arc back to, well, when I was at school this was how it was, and you can't, and it's not always like that, especially with the AI conversation that we've highlighted into that space. And you mentioned the heads together piece as well, and I know that uh, we've been following what you've been doing there in terms of the leadership development, and our conversations a lot on the podcast are with heads or with people that are leading across different sectors. What did you find came out of that conversation in those heads together event, that heads together event, and what are the priorities from a leadership perspective there, perhaps?
So, I mean, I think, I remain humbled and inspired by head teachers when I meet them. They're often very capable executives in my mind. They're running, complex organizations with, 100 staff and 1,000 pupils. And as I said earlier, a budget of 6 or 7 million, and that's if they're in a single school rather than managing a mat. So these are capable individuals, and what the difference that a leader can make in business is no difference than the leader of business can make in a school. If you've got a great head, then the levels of discipline, attainment, structure, enjoyment, really lift in a school. So building on the leadership skills is really important. We've previously worked in the Southwest with something called SW100, which is trying to find those next 100 head teachers. And in fact, we went out to the US with the 100 cohort over a series of years. It was 25 per year. And actually examine what sort of brilliant can look like, and also in London, in Feltham, what really excellent in the UK looks like, which is the individual that formed that initiative runs that school, which is truly an exceptional sort of year 2 through to 18 school with huge waiting lists because of the power of the leadership and capability. So the difference between a great school, a good school and a great school, or a good business and a great business, is always going to come down to leadership. So investing in those people, trying to find spot talent early enough, investing in that talent is really key. And some of the discussion was how we go about doing that. And the University of Birmingham helped moderate that particular session. And we're likely to roll this West Midlands 100 out as well next year. We're just in the process of finalising that at the moment.
This episode of Edufuturist is powered by Integrated Systems Europe, the must-attend event for educators, technologists and institutional leaders seeking to shape the future of learning.
From the 3rd to the 6th of February 2026, ISE returns to Barcelona, uniting the brightest minds and the boldest ideas in the edtech industry. Join us and push back beyond the possibilities that are transforming the classroom of tomorrow.
Don't just keep up with the industry, get ahead of it. Check out the video that's coming next to find out more and join us for ISE 2026. We'll be there in Barcelona, and use our special code Edufuturists for free registration at iseeurope.org.
The world of education is changing, and education technology is helping to change it. Different teaching styles, more flexible delivery, and a wider range of resources. All of these mean EdTech is playing a greater role than ever. And that applies to learning taking place in the classroom, the lecture hall, the corporate training centre, or delivered online. Integrated Systems Europe is the world-renowned annual tech show for the systems integration and audio-visual industry. At ISE 2026, you will find all the leading EdTech brands in our Education Technology Zone in Halls 1 and 2, in our Connected Classroom Showcase, and across the show floor. Solutions on display include wireless presentation systems, interactive displays, short-throw projectors, collaboration tables, VR and AR systems, lecture capture, and integrated lecterns. In fact, ISE 2026 has everything you need to create learning experiences that are engaging, involving, and inclusive. See what you can learn. Come to ISE 2026 and explore the future of EdTech.
So it's a really interesting one because teachers are leaving within, or there's a shortage in terms of that skills gap, and it's ever increasing. And then the education is an interesting one because ultimately to progress and be paid more as an educator, there isn't any. The difference between superstars and rock stars, I always define as a rock star is a rock bed. So a teacher that wants to spend their whole career in that kind of job, or any job, that doesn't want to progress up to leadership. So you've got people, we don't have enough rock stars, and ultimately, how do we then generate enough superstars, the ones that are on a trajectory into any type of leadership, whether that is just mentoring other teachers, whether that is a head of year, whatever role that is, and all the way up to a head teacher. Is it a mix of actually trying to reset the foundations of less people leaving the sector as teachers, stabilize that foundation, recruit within, and capture people coming externally into leadership roles in schools that haven't been in education at all? What are your thoughts on that, I guess, or if you have any thoughts based on the events that you've been doing?
You're right to say that there's a crisis appearing on the horizon with numbers of teachers. That's nationwide. I do think that parental relationship's a big factor. People don't want to go to work to be offended. They want to go to work to enjoy what they do, feel they're adding value. So I think that's a critical issue to resolve with parents. I understand actually, because it's seen as a safer place with AI, the teacher training aspect right now is quite strong. People are thinking, is this a career I can get stability in, longevity in, that's not going to be dramatically impacted? We'll wait and see whether that outcome is true. Leadership is, you've ultimately need with leadership, you've got to have that in you. You've got to want that, as you call rock stars. You 100% you need the main cadre of your workforce to be in that category. But those people that want to get on and lead and genuinely want to do that for the right reasons and believe that they are capable of doing it and ultimately become capable of doing it, we've got to enhance those people as much as possible. I look at some of the great charity founders that I work with that came out of Teach First as an example, and there are some really good models out there to create these powerful people. But I think that more needs to be done, because often, if you're in a mat, then it's probably easier to find roles, to move around, to be spotted. If you're in a local authority-based school, that's possibly harder. Is there the same HR function capability review underway? People's performance reviews is really varied in life. It really does depend on your line manager as to whether it's constructive or not. So it's the same in business, I have to say, as it is in schools. And you can get good or bad in the same company, depending on the line manager. So there isn't a one size fits all answer here, other than, as I say, where there are programs that can be leveraged. Those programs that show people what great looks like, not just like what good looks like, can be very beneficial.
Sorry, Ben. I was just going to say, I think it's a really. I'm just trying to think what my thought was there, because I said Ben, don't come in. I probably lost it.
You're trying to tell me not to come in there. Well, shall I go while you're thinking?
Yeah. Let's do that.
So I'm keen, and it's on the similar kind of vein, and a lot of that from a leadership perspective is a cultural thing, isn't it? It's about how you lead a culture, and you can have a great policy, and you can have great leadership traits and whatnot, but how do you build a culture into that space? And you've led and you lead a lot of people as your organisation, and you're seeing great leaders as head teachers who are inspiring executives and whatnot. What are from a cultural perspective then, what do you think matters, and what can we translate that from great cultures that might work into leading of schools, for those people who are listening to this who are leading or aspiring into leadership? There's a lot of them cultural elements around values and mission and other bits that sit into that. What would you give that? And I know that you're thinking, wow, we're getting some free advice here from one of the top guys in business in the UK. So I'm interested. Never mind anybody else listening to it.
Well, I think consistency and communication are right up there for me. So have a vision, stick to it, communicate regularly in a controlled way to your people. Don't let them down. Be dependable in what you've outlined, I think is critical. If you look at the challenges we have in the country right now with our political leadership, it's not having a clear enough vision and message that's fully understood that everyone's behind. It's not communicating that loudly enough, frequently enough to the country. It's not building confidence in your team. So we all go to work every day and have knocks and highs, and that's just the way life works. So the difference between great leaders is that they inspire people at the low points. They congratulate them at the high points. But I think at the heart of it, you've got to have a really clear vision for your organization, what you're trying to do. It needs to be realistic. If you've got a school that's in difficulty, you're not going to turn it around in a single term or in a single academic year. It's about going through the gears in a controlled, organized way. It's exactly the same in business. So setting realistic objectives, but being super clear about what you're trying to achieve, reporting on it, communicating it clearly, and inspiring people to play their part in that journey, for me, is what makes a great leader.
Yeah, absolutely. It's interesting, the ties between all leadership is leadership, I suppose. Like, people always often I sit in a leadership role, and people ask difference between education and commercial, and I don't think it's really interesting. I said leading a group of students in a classroom when I was a teacher to leading a business. I don't think this is probably a little bit easier leading the children often, but it's really interesting. Just humans in the fold do add complexity, and I think it was just on multi-academy trust versus local authority. That was my thought. That kind of struggled to pull out. I can't remember which union it was recently, and there was a whole conversation, an interview done by that union on multi-academy trusts and the leadership and the investment that they're making in leadership. And I thought it was I just didn't agree with it at all. It was ultimately saying there was so much levels of leadership. Why do multi-academy trusts need a CEO, and why do they need a deputy CEO? Why do they need this leadership? And I was like, the challenge is these organisations, when you look at them, are such big organisations and need to be led differently. We can't always look at them with the rose-tinted glasses from when we were in education and everything was run by a local authority. That actually it's no longer just a head teacher and a deputy head, and maybe somebody looks after safeguarding. And there's so much complexities in the structure of business that has evolved, and education now. And I think to hear it from the union, and it was about taking the investment and to be able to reinvest in the teachers themselves. I get what the actual message was, but at the same point, I was like you've said, if it's not led well, those teachers won't want to stay anywhere. So I think
the big difference is that everybody gets the same settlement per child.
Yep.
It's the maths, so if they can perform well and attract pupils through having a good, great learning environment, people want to attend, will attract more pupils. That's a virtuous circle that creates more cash, allows more investment. And so this is unfortunately some of the negative behaviour that we are seeing today from the Labour Party and from the unions. Just wanting a flat playing field where everyone does the same is not the way life works. We want schools to excel, to really, really try hard, to be standout organisations that really have long waiting lists. That's a good thing in life. It's not a bad thing. And if someone needs to have a higher structure but does so runs a better organisation to afford that structure, bear in mind they have no other sources of funding, then hats off to them. If they can run that organisation better, that allows them to benefit from somebody like Alex, who Ben and I know, who is funded by a MAT of 20 schools to be an AI only individual. Now you couldn't do that as a single local authority school, but as a MAT you can allocate the resources to do it because you believe in it, and you're getting synergies and benefits for scale. So just criticising things that are working well because it doesn't suit all schools, for me, feels very, very backward behaviour.
Yeah, they also called out. They said the crazy amounts of money just going to waste. I've heard of some trusts giving an iPad to every single learner, 1-to-1, and I was like, I think you're getting them. You've not been into many schools because ultimately that is, like in terms of the age of technology. If you do not buy that, if you cannot afford enough teachers, we totally understand that. But at the same point, let's be honest, I think a lot of teachers are not wanting to fill those posts. When I was in education and a leader in education, you would put a job advert out there and they would be absolutely filled, and it'd be such a hard sift. Where actually that's not the
certainly not
effect anymore.
Certainly not in everyone, and there's some organisations where you're thinking. I had a conversation with a multi academy trust in the Midlands, not in Birmingham, but in the Midlands, who put out a head of AI role across the trust, a relatively decent sized trust, and they didn't get a single application because, and that was potentially going to be into. So even in something that's potentially exciting and all the other bits that go with that, it's a challenge. So I think there is definitely challenges more broadly about where we go with that. One thought before we wrap up with some quick fire questions is we've touched on the AI conversation. I know you mentioned Alex earlier, who's been on the podcast as well, and we've talked about that it is already disrupting, and we can only see that more disruption that sits in that space. What are you seeing as a leader, but also from somebody who's heavily involved in education? Where do you think AI is fitting into that mix, from what you're seeing as the weak signals currently?
Well, yeah, the UK has had a productivity problem since about 2010, and that's meant that our economy has reduced in size quite substantially compared to the US. And still today, where I think we're 18 or 19% behind productivity with France and with Germany, as an example. So this is an opportunity for us to increase our productivity as a country. That's the positive. So we have the potential to change the trajectory of the country, but only if people embrace that technology effectively. If we don't embrace it effectively and we're fearful of it, it has the ability to substantially damage our economy and in the process damage the prospects for our young people. So there's a societal issue here that the government has to ensure that we've got the correct plan in place for AI. That's not just in schools, it's also in businesses, and allowing things like the Growth and Skills Levy to help fund some of the in-life training required for people who are in work. Back to schools, we just had the curriculum review. AI is mentioned. It's not particularly deep in mentioning. And I fear that we're seeing AI as a negative rather than a positive. And AI has the ability to enhance people's learning, has the ability to enhance their productivity, has the ability to enhance our teachers' productivity. And collectively put those together, we do have a chance to break out of the current cycle and give our young people a fresh chance. But only if we embrace that technology fully. If we don't, the societal impacts will be significant. What we don't know is the roles that will be created, but we do know the roles that are starting to be impacted. So let's take a service desk employee who's answering phone calls for a bank. Those roles are gradually being removed, at a reasonable pace, 3 to 6% per year. That's a big cohort. I think it's 700,000 people fall under call centers. It's a good entry level job. If you're training to be a lawyer or an accountant, we know that the graduate intake is down 60%. So we have to start thinking about how we enable our young people to be brighter, better people, back to that creativity, ingenuity, communication skills we talked about earlier. So there's a lot to do on AI. I fear, this latest review by Becky Francis, had some positives in there on the curriculum, but I fear it didn't reflect where in the industry is today, and a real need for us to start to accelerate where AI will go in the curriculum, how it should be embraced by the children and by teachers. How do we make people learn in an environment where the answers being provided for them are the same models of having to research and recite facts still relevant today in an environment where those are available, ad infinitum in your pocket on your telephone? The whole thing, in my opinion, requires a future strategy. The concern is that the curriculum review is just published. It's the first one, I think, since Michael Gove's. We're not likely to have one for another 10 years. That feels too far. And that we really need to start thinking about the adoption of AI in a more prolific way across our school system sooner rather than later.
Yeah, we quite a few months ago we had the Youth Shadow Council on, who had published what the changes they would like to see in
Interesting.
tandem, much more revolution and impactful than the one that actually came out. So it talked about sustainability, it talked about lots of different things. AI and technology was one of those, and if only that was the actual review that came out, shall we say, and leave it there. Because actually, did we ask the young people, or did we ask the same people that we always ask and expect a different result and a different change? I think as much as any change is better, I just think it wasn't enough.
I have some sympathy. We've got a great performing educational system in the world. We're very highly regarded. We've done it well for many years. Why change what's not broken? And in principle, I buy into that. The issue is the world's changing, and it's changing quicker than anyone can see. And we don't know the ramifications or the timelines involved with that change. Therefore, you have to start planning for multiple scenarios and accelerate your plans accordingly. I just didn't see that emphasis coming through in that curriculum review.
And we will go on to our quick fires, but one of our favourite quotes to always mention on the podcast is you cannot fix new problems with old solutions. And our education system is looked at fondly and positively and isn't broken. It was just designed a long time ago when people look and go, look how wonderful it was. But the problem is we now have new problems and we need to find new solutions for those rather than do the things that we've always done.
Agreed.
Okay, we always do free quick-fire questions. We don't give them to our guests. Ben might have given you behind the scenes. I don't know. He might have been sneaky.
It would have been handy.
It would, but you know what? Let's see how we get on, Steve. From one Steve to another. I will start, then Ben, and then Alfin, if that's okay. So, the first one. If schools were judged like restaurants by how much customers actually enjoy the experience, what would change overnight?
I'm not sure that will be helpful, if I'm honest with you. Just because, again, a restaurant's optional, school isn't. And, I think it would be helpful to get more view of curriculum. But the school itself, I think it would be less helpful to do that. But perhaps focus maybe children on thinking about the relevancy of their curriculum for their future lives.
Just a point to note, education is compulsory. A school is not.
Good, true.
Second one. What's the most dangerous myth that educators tell themselves to avoid real change?
Gosh, I would circle back, Ben, to what we've just been discussing. That you can't live in the past just because I'm from the West Midlands. We've got an amazing industrial heritage, but that doesn't mean our advanced manufacturing sector will sustain the change happening with electric vehicles and other things happening. So you can't live in the past. You've got to look forward. You've also got to look globally today at the skills needed to compete on a global stage. And I fear that we're spending too much time looking in the rearview mirror.
Great response. And the last one. If a 10-year-old asked you why they have to go to school, what would you actually say, Steve?
Because I say so.
Just because you say so. Well, he's the boss. Listen
if
to him.
If it's my 10-year-old. No, I mean, joking aside, I mean, obviously, it's a parent's job to sell the virtues of an education. And there are so many positive things about going to school. It's not just about an education, as we know. The equally important things are your friends, the sports you do, the life experience you have, and that follows through in lots of areas. So somehow, selling that it's not just about, the lessons, it's about all the other great things that come along with attendance in education that, for me is where I would lead.
Absolutely love that. Seeing beyond just school for having to learn stuff, but actually the social elements that go into that, which obviously circles right back around into why you're doing the work that you're doing and the philanthropy that's in that space. We know it's been an absolute privilege to be able to get the time with you and sit on the podcast today. So thank you so much for giving us that time. And I know that this will resonate with so many people from different parts of our audience. So Steve, thank you so much for joining us on the Edufuturists podcast.
Thank you both.
And keep doing great stuff to make a difference for young people. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Steve.